Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Crime Dawg podcast with your host and content creator, Johnny FIORICA, who claims to be patient but yells at DirecTV customer service 10 seconds into the call.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Crime Dawg podcast. Your host, content creator, Johnny FIORICA, 30-year veteran, Rochester, New York Police Department. I retired last October 2023, along with my trusted co-host, sitting next to me on my left. He's in a different position today because it's a unique podcast. We do not have a guest, so he left his plush corporate chair that sits across from me. His name is David SIMPSON. He's a 20-year veteran of the Rochester Police Department, retired. He's a legendary street cop. He is a SWAT cop. He is a homicide detective. David, welcome to the pod.
Happy to be here. I definitely like the other seat a little better. Thanks, Jay.
David, I'm happy to have you on the couch. Nice to have you here.
That sweet voice that you heard, Jason Blanchard, the Locks of Love, I call him. He is a 25-year veteran of the Rochester Police Department, currently employed. He worked all over the Rock. He worked Genesee. He worked Lake. He worked Clinton section. He literally is currently the lead hostage negotiator on the RPD hostage team. He is the self-proclaimed alpha male of this podcast. He is a 1994 Hall of Famer of what? We have no idea. Jason, welcome to the pod.
Johnny, thank you. That was a tremendous introduction. I appreciate it.
So, guys, we're doing something unique in our new studio today. This is the first pod that we do not have a guest. The guest usually sits to my left, where David's sitting today. David has so benevolently left his corporate chair and is going to sit on the couch with Jason. So it makes our producer, Danny Agnew, more happy so he can then have less editing and post-production. Guys, we had to do this pod today, right? We had to do this pod because we talk about our podcast as being about law enforcement, but things that affect law enforcement. The one thing that has stuck in our craw for the last, I don't know, few weeks, 3 weeks, 4, whatever, how long it's been, is this whole Palestine-Israel thing going on right now and how it affected law enforcement. Domestically, the way it's affected law enforcement is we see all over the news, these college campuses all over the country where our brothers and sisters have to be brought in to defend whomever, and then all of a sudden, these quote-unquote activists and these protesters then turn on the cops. Jay, I know you got strong opinions, so I'm going to start with you. Our brothers and sisters all over the country are dealing with this issue currently, right?
Right, and it's being handled differently throughout the country, right? By however universities have chosen to handle it. So, University of Florida took a pretty hard line initially, and congrats, right? Made it pretty easy for people to understand what the expectations were. And if you were a student and you were causing problems, you were going to be expelled. If you were an employee who was causing problems, you were going to be separated from the university.
And how did that work out?
I didn't see any problems down there. Did you, David?
Problems either when they
right. And I've also seen, the other hand of it, right? How it's been handled in New York City. And ultimately, I mentioned this before we started, right? I thought about this. We remember this class is like 2024 graduating, but it was also the class that was affected with COVID. So these kids who were high school seniors are now college seniors, and they were probably deprived of a formal graduation ceremony in high school. And now they're being deprived of it again in colleges because some of colleges have canceled these graduation ceremonies as a result of these agitators. And as you said, most of them are not college students, or at least at that college, right? They're coming in, and the stuff that was done is reprehensible. And I can't believe, colleges should be for freedom of thought and development and everything else, but it shouldn't be people feeling unsafe, specifically Jewish students who can't walk freely on class through the quad or whatever. And they had people openly challenging them and telling them that they weren't allowed there.
Everybody, look at this. Look at this. I'm a UCLA student. I deserve to go here. We pay tuition. This is our school. And they're not letting me walk in. My class is over there. I want to use that entrance. This could be over in a second. Just let me and my friends go in to class.
And the fact that universities allowed that, I'm nuts about it, right? It's just absolutely incenses me that it's the case. And what's happening, what they're attempting to happen is they're trying to, in my opinion, to change the narrative, right? So we know what happened, and we don't need to get into all the stuff in the Middle East, but we know what happened and how this event started. We know it was started by Hamas going in and basically attacking a music festival of innocent civilians. Okay, that's not disputed. Nobody with any brain in their head is arguing that. That's the facts. And I gave the analogy that it would be no different in when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, and when we responded, Japan said, "We don't know why you're attacking us. We don't understand." Right? The narrative is attempting to be changed because Israel has responded, and they're using these college campuses as that focal point, which again now putting I should say law enforcement in a lose-lose spot because it's private property, these universities and everything else, and now they're coming in and forced to clear these communes that have been set up and have been allowed to be set up for the last 2, 3, 4 weeks. It blows my mind that we would allow that to happen. We as society.
One thing Jay said that I agree with is it goes back a number of the SEC schools, your Floridas, your Alabamas, I think Georgia may or may not have been involved in that too, where gave very clear-cut directions on what was the expectations of the protesters, what the ramifications would be if you violated these terms, and things have been very quiet at those schools. Then you take schools like Columbia and UCLA, among others, and that have given no clear-cut directions, horrible leadership at the top, allowed these quote-unquote protesters to gain a foothold and get empowered, and then are shocked with all their education and all their PhDs that the shit has hit the fan and they got to call the cops in to bail them out. And again, it just goes to the same story we always talk about, that you could have all these degrees and still be an idiot, because anyone would know that if you let a group gain traction and push boundaries, all they're going to do is keep pushing boundaries. And it doesn't matter if it's at Columbia, UCLA, or the University of Rochester.
Well, a group that has no business being there to begin with. Right?
Exactly.
I mean, we're talking about a large percentage that are not students and are professional agitators / protesters.
Right. And then you arrest these people. Why cops aren't put in a bad spot, because you arrest these people and they all get APT'd and they're all back out within a few hours. And there's no teeth to anything they do. And then we can go all the way up to the top, and we have a feckless president who doesn't even address it for weeks and weeks. And, where's Schumer, whose claim to fame, one of them was that how much he supported his constituents, the Jewish community in New York City, and he's nowhere to be found. He's missing. So those are things that piss me off about it. And, it's really sad that the Israeli people had to go through this, during World War II, and now they're attacked again. And they weren't attacked. It wasn't military installations attacked like a true war would be. This is a terrorist attack on innocent people. Women were raped. People were killed and kidnapped. For God's sake, there's still American citizens, not even mentioning the Israeli hostages. Excuse my language. There's fucking U.S. people with U.S. citizenship that are still held captive, and we have a feckless president that won't even address it. So, and these people are supporting the state of Palestine, which, if you support in my opinion, if you support the state of Palestine, you're supporting Hamas.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about, our brothers and sisters in law enforcement, both locally and nationally, being thrust into this situation because obviously we're the Crime Dawg podcast. We talk about how there are situations and or topics that either directly or indirectly affect, and this is one that indirectly affects our brothers and sisters both locally and nationally. And we talk about things like them going onto the campus because they're ordered to do so by whatever municipality they are from. But what I think it's very important to drive home the point on is these college campuses, they're private property, right? That real estate is owned by the school or the institution. So they can only, the law enforcement can only serve at the direction or at the whim of, or at the request of the institution that owns the real estate, right?
Unless there's an emergency response.
Unless there's an emergency response. So you had, which by the way, we know he's been a wet noodle, Mayor Adams over there in New York City. He's been a wet noodle. He was supposed to be some.
He's in Rome.
Yeah. He offered the NYPD, kudos to him for that, but he's been a wet noodle ever since he got in office. However, our boys and girls, our brothers and sisters are then thrust in the middle of this thing because now you get them on the campus, and then what do we see with these agitators? You see them now then turning on the cops, right? So they go from their narrative of defending Palestine and or whomever, Hamas or Palestine. And then you got them turning on the cops that are there to make sure that shit don't go sideways, right? That is a problem, number one. My biggest bone of contention, aside from all the horrific stuff that went on in the Middle East, when we talk about domestically, is the janitors of Columbia University that got literally held hostage inside the university. And I'm going to tell you right now, selfishly, I hope those guys and their families ring the bell. I hope that they sue the endowment, the institution, the college. I hope that those janitors, who they went to work as a support staff to support the students that went to that school, I hope that they sue the balls off of Columbia. And I hope they take a huge chunk out of their endowment or whatever the billions of dollars they get from their alumni. I hope that they grab that money and throw the old Italian stiff arm to them, because I'll tell you why. Those guys are blue collar workers. They went there as a support staff to support those kids, those children who now are agitators and protesters, and they get held hostage. That's bullshit. That's bullshit.
Well, and let's remember too, they forcibly took over buildings.
Yeah.
Right? They forcibly, so there wasn't this narrative of this peaceful protest.
Yeah.
People were sitting around and chanting or doing whatever. They were obstructing justice.
Yeah.
They were forcibly smashing windows and breaking in to buildings.
The burglary.
And occupying them.
Yeah.
Right? Burglaries. And apparently that's all okay. Again, I'd like to know how many of them were students and
how many of them are charged with burglary?
Correct.
So we always got to charge the lowest possible denominator.
Right. Maybe charge terroristic some type of charge. And again, no different than all these people that were in DC when they stormed the Capitol and took over the Capitol. Well, what they're doing on these colleges' campuses, they're doing the same thing. They're storming these buildings for their own agendas. And again, shame on, in my opinion, shame on the colleges for reacting in such a slow way that they allowed it to happen. And as we said, the SEC schools, the Southern schools, you didn't really see that happening down there. You seem to see it happen at these, these Ivy League schools where
Republican states,
where the big thinkers are.
I wonder if that has anything to do with it.
I will tell you this. So Jay, I want you to sit quiet for 1 second, right?
I'll try.
I know you're going to try, but I want to harken back to our 2020 riots in Rochester. Okay. David, which I'm only addressing you because we're going to carve Jason out for 30 seconds. It's just like what Jason is saying. It's like, okay, you want to protest and you want to say because we were there as cops to protect, which we do. We protect people's right to protest. That's our job. Even when they protest against us, which in the 2020 riots, that's what they were doing. They were protesting against the RPD, which we get it. We're there to make everybody in the community safe. We had no problem with protesters that want to be peaceful and say they oppose something. However, and there's a big however, okay? When you start throwing frozen water bottles at my brothers and sisters, when you start throwing bags of shit and piss at my brothers and sisters that are holding the line,
burning cars,
when you start burning our police cars, when you start to raid the All City Footwear, wherever that, what was that place on Liberty Pole Way, that the family we heard, which I don't know if it's urban folklore, I'm pretty sure it's true, but they used to give their excess sneakers to the depressed parts of our community. When they went and looted these stores, that's where it becomes bullshit, okay? And I worked undercover in these protests. I have been sent by my former employer, the RPD, when I worked undercover. I used to walk in these protests, okay? I used to go in with the agitators just to be a part of the community, just like some of my other undercover brothers and sisters have done, and they will continue to do. But once you broach that line of burning down buildings, stealing shit, throwing frozen water bottles and shit and piss at our brothers and sisters, and then turning your anger or your ire on our brothers and sisters, that's when it becomes BS to me. You know what I'm saying, David?
Yeah, and it becomes BS in that if I don't care if it's you're hanging out with 4 individuals that are doing that, you get what you get too. Like
right.
we that doesn't give you, oh, I didn't do it, isn't going to fly. You know, if you see this going on and you're not A, stopping it, or A, walking away and saying, hey, I'm not a part of this.
Right.
There's another way to do this.
Right.
You're hanging out with these people that are
Right.
assaulting the police, all right, and committing property damage. You're part of the problem.
Right.
All right. You're facilitating it. You're encouraging it. You're giving them strength in numbers by your presence. All right. If all the quote unquote non-participants that, oh, we didn't do it, left, there'd be a very small minority of people left. Maybe that would be the case. Know how quickly that would get quelled?
Well,
it'd take minutes.
There's, and I'm not speaking about 2020. I'm talking in generalities, and we all understand there's a distinct difference between peaceful protests and rioting and riotous behavior. There's a distinct difference, right? Yeah. Violence, yeah, and burning cars and things. There's a distinct difference.
Committing crimes is not peaceful.
Are a part of our nation's history.
Yeah.
And nobody is saying that that's problematic. It's when the occupation of public areas and colleges,
yeah,
and intimidating people,
right?
That's not peaceful protest.
Shutting down
destruction of property,
and then coming and saying these are our demands to the administration. Yeah. Those aren't peaceful protests,
right?
That is not the definition of a peaceful protest, right? And it's putting the men and women in law enforcement in dangerous situations for no reason, for their personal agendas, for the protesters' personal agendas.
But Jay, where does it always come back to? Weak leadership.
Well, that's
strong leadership does not tolerate that shit, and it doesn't fly. And criminals, and these people are these career protesters are criminals. And they go to places where weakness is propagated. You know, they go to these schools where they know the president is feckless. You know, these strong schools, you use the example of Florida, they're not going there because they know what's going to happen. It's going to be over real quick, and the party's not going to be fun.
Right.
Right? Because there's a cause and an effect there. What happens to these other schools, and it's happening in our own community here in Rochester, and let's just segue that. I heard that in the Lilac parade, there was an entry of individuals that were allowed to participate in the parade that were flying Palestinian flags and showing support and allowed to be in this parade, but there was no other government people in the parade other than these protesters.
Yeah, and Jay, hold off. We don't want you to comment on that, right? Because you're active. So I'm going to take the flag on that. No pun intended. Yeah. So we have a Lilac Festival, which is like an artsy, craftsy, social. It's so awesome. It's been around for I can't tell you how many decades. And I don't even blame the people that made that decision because they took the path of least resistance, right?
I do.
Because they didn't want to riot, they didn't want anything. But you take this late entry into the parade that they were there. Of course, it's not a political realm. Of course, it's the Lilac Festival. It is the most passive, most beautiful thing that we have in the Rochester community, which, and again, we're not, passing judgment on whoever made the decision to allow them in, because I know exactly why they made the decision, which I don't disagree with, because they were going to come anyways, right, David? Those people were going to insert themselves in the parade, be a pain in the ass to whomever said, okay, we'll let you in the parade. And at the end of the day, it comes down to them being disruptors. There was no reason for them to be in a parade like that. They did it to disrupt, and they did it because they thought they were going to be like, oh, no, you can't do it. And then they were going to act like a,
But when you give these people an inch, they take a mile.
Yeah.
All right. And then we've seen it time and time again. When you give them the courtyard, they take the building.
Right.
When you give them the parade, they take the courtyard. I mean, the problem with the appeasement angle with these people, and this is what the PhDs don't teach these college presidents, is they keep gaining ground. And once you give up ground, it's hard to take it back. And when you allow rules to be broken on these college campuses, I'm using this as an example, and you allow these courtyards to be overtaken. If we went and tried to pitch a tent on U of R's campus, the three of us,
not a shot.
Say, you know what? We're going to protest. That
Jackie Schumer would have pulled the tents out right from under.
Right. We would be surrounded and locked up and kicked off campus and get scaffooned.
Right.
But these individuals are allowed to gain traction. And they get empowered and they go. And we're banging the same drum. Yeah. And it keeps happening. And it's a lesson that someday will get learned, that the appeasement angle is not. You need a deterrent. You need to have clear guidelines of what's acceptable behavior and what is not acceptable behavior, just like you do with children. And when you cross that line, there's repercussions that are immediate and swift.
Well, I'll do you one better in closing on my end. I think that there are those clear lines. I think that when your kids go to college, there are students' codes of conduct that exist.
But they're not enforced. They don't exist.
So that's my point, right?
Do they exist if they're not enforced?
Well, they exist for some. So they exist for some times and some places, but they're not enforced unilaterally across the board. And that's the problem, right? So I'm sure if you went to any college, I don't care what it is, state school, private school, I'm quite positive there's a code of conduct for students. And I'm fairly certain that what's going on these campuses is in violation of a ton of those codes if they chose to enforce them. But that might not necessarily be the decision that's made.
Right. Appeasement.
Yeah. Well, guys, let's wrap this up by saying, as law enforcement, all three of us have supported peaceful protests. We've protected people from oncoming traffic, from fights and whatever. We've stood the ground in between even people that were protesting against us, because it is their right to protest until it morphs into that violent side, until it morphs into the criminality, until it morphs into the things that we talked about. So we're there as law enforcement to be that person, right? We talked about our thin blue line segment, right? We are that thin blue line in between chaos and reality, right? In between chaos and the non-chaos. We're there to support people that want to peacefully protest. We're not going to be there for people that, this podcast is not going to be there to support people that want to take it to another level. At the end of the day, when we talk about our brothers and sisters standing and towing that line, they should not be there thrown in the middle with these people, with these kids that are doing what they're doing, and they're also turning against law enforcement we talked about. But folks, that's our take on it. Here's the thing. We're going to end with this clip with the best president, Ronald Reagan. He had the best clip when it came to these protests at college campuses.
All of it began the first time some of you who know better and are old enough to know better let young people think that they had the right to choose the laws they would obey as long as they were doing it in the name of social protest.
Folks, we hope our brothers and sisters stay safe during these protests, both locally and nationally. Our thoughts and prayers are with everybody. Keep it peacefully. Please keep it peacefully. Your right to protest is an inherent American right. I want to thank Jason Blanchard for this was a passion project on his part. Jay, thank you for suggesting that we talk about this tonight because you're 100% right. I want to thank you for bringing that up. Thank you for your comments. David, thank you for your comments. Folks, thanks for listening to the Crime Dawg podcast. Listen, we got the crimedawgpodcast.com. Like us there. That's our website. We also have a YouTube channel called the Crime Dawg Podcast. Like us there. Follow us there. Subscribe there. Listen to all of our future episodes. But like my brother-in-law Frankie Grassi says, if you can't make it, who cares?